It's really nice to have you here. But I saw that you tweeted, I am going to Sweden on Monday. I am kind of scared. Of what?
Well, everyone here is super fit and healthy. And when I pulled in from the airport, there were bikers everywhere, and I was like, oh, my fears are correct. And those bikers were going really fast. And so, I mean, it's always nervous when you go to a different country. As a woman of color, as a woman of size, I've always just wondered, you know, what is it going to be like? Are the people going to be friendly? And I'm always pleasantly surprised. And
so how have we been so far?
So far, so good. I'll let you know tomorrow. But it's been wonderful.
Okay, I'll be careful.
Yes, you're on notice.
I'll
but you have
erase
great
some
shoes,
of the questions. But let's talk about your debut novel, An Untamed State. So this is a really... I mean, it's a violent novel. It's about kidnapping, rape, trauma. But still, it starts off as a fairy tale. And
Absolutely.
the first line is, once upon a time, in a far-off land, I was kidnapped by a gang of fearless yet terrified young men. So what is the fairy tale in An Untamed State?
The fairy tale, well, there are two fairy tales, really. At the beginning of the novel, Mireille doesn't realize her life is a fairy tale. And then it's taken from her, and she's kidnapped. And not only is she kidnapped, her father refuses to pay the ransom. And so as she tries to endure the attacks that she faces from her kidnappers, she starts to reflect on her life. And so I'm at once building up the fairy tale of her marriage and the birth of her child, and then tearing it back down with what happens to her during her kidnapping. And then the fairy tale becomes rebuilt once more as she overcomes what she endured and as she tries to get back to the woman she once was.
Well, Mireille is actually, to begin with, she's a very strong-headed, stubborn woman, and she knows what she wants, and she gets it. So why did you want that kind of protagonist?
Because I think that women are interesting and complex, and they don't have to always be polite and demure and friendly all the time. Mireille is very complicated, and I love her. I think she's awesome. And
she hangs up on people constantly.
She does. She's such a pain. I wouldn't marry her, but, you know, someone did. I never anticipated that readers were going to be like, oh, I can't stand her. I'm just like, oh my God, you're talking about my baby.
But do they?
A lot of readers say they hate her and that she's horrible because...
Why?
Because she has an attitude and she believes in herself and she's competent, which, you know, women aren't allowed to do that kind of thing. So, because, you know, she doesn't make things easier for herself.
Yeah. Well, actually, reading An Untamed State is sometimes excruciating. I mean, the rape scenes or the torture scenes are horrible, and I was trying to read and look away at the same time. But what was it like writing this raw violence? The
same way. I thought really carefully about how I was going to write the violence, because all too often when we write violence, either for books or television and film, you can watch it or you can read through it, which means that it's too stylized and that it covers up the truth of what violence can be. And so I wanted to make it explicit so that the reader was forced to look away, which is a strange thing to do as a writer, but I wanted the violence to feel real.
So how has it been? How have the reactions been? I mean, was it...
The reactions have been exactly what I wanted. A lot of times at events, readers will come up to me and say, I had to put the book down, or you made me cry, or I feel gutted. And I think, then my work here is done. Yeah. I've done exactly what I want to do as a writer.
Well, actually, one of the things that I reacted the most to, I discovered, was that the kidnappers are not only violent, but they also want her to understand them.
Yes. You know, one of my most important guidelines as a writer is that nobody is any one thing. And so the bad guys can't be all bad, and the good guys can't be all good. And so I had to make sure that these kidnappers were desperate. And my parents are from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And growing up, we would go and it would be beautiful. And I would love it. And I just thought, this is amazing. And the older I got, the more I began to realize that there is another side to paradise and that someone's paying the price. And so when I wrote the novel, I thought about how desperate do you have to be to justify to yourself kidnapping another human being? And then I tried to put myself in that mindset. And I tried to make these kidnappers more than just brutish men. These were men with lives and with families of their own and with desires of their own that were never going to be realized because of a country where poverty is absolute. And so, yes, these men want Mireille to understand, look what you enjoy on our backs.
Well, actually, all men in this novel are bad. Even the good ones make big, big mistakes.
Yes, I think the men are human, and the women are human. But the men are particularly
human.
I don't know what happened. It was a bad year. I think that the men in this novel are all faced with choices and they don't rise to the occasion. And in some cases, that's understandable. Michael, of course, the husband who never seems to quite make the right choice.
Well, actually, I mean, most stories end when the victim is set free.
Yes.
But this is just the middle of your novel, because after that, there's the afterwards. Mm-hmm. So what happens there?
I was really interested in not having it be this beautiful reunion and everything is fine once she's released. That's not how trauma works. Trauma generally lingers. And so I wanted to explore, what do you do to overcome the kinds of things? How do you overcome the kind of rape she experienced? And the being torn from her family and thinking she was never going to see her baby again. How do you survive something like that? And so I wanted to show what survival takes.
Well, I mean, I read in Bad Feminist you write about the rape that happened to you when you were just a kid, actually. And it's so heartbreaking because you also repeat the line, I was a good girl. I was a good girl.
Yes, because I was. And that's why I think it was so surprising. Like, I was so unprepared for what happened because I was a good Catholic girl. I went to church every Sunday. I went to CCD on Mondays, and I was good to my brothers. And so it was just astonishing to me that people could treat each other this way. I knew nothing about the world or about men or about sex. And so I was a good girl, and then I wasn't.
Was that why you wanted to make Mireille such a fighter?
Absolutely. I think she was doing the fighting I didn't know how to do. I mean, I was different. I was 12, so I mean, there was just no way. Like, you know, when you're that little, there's just nothing you can do. But I think she certainly was an expression of everything I wish I had done, and wish I had had the sort of fortitude to do.
Why do you think people so seldom write about this? I mean, the trauma, the afterwards, actually, because when your book actually really begins in the afterwards.
Yes. I think people don't want to understand the after. They just want to believe that it's a nice story. Something terrible happens and you overcome it. They don't want to look at what endurance takes because it's uncomfortable. It's a messy process and it's a lifelong process. You know, even at the end of the novel, which my dad says needs more action. He's like, you know, Roxane, this needs a little more action. I think that we still don't really know how things are going to end for her. We just, I hope, have a sense of hope that she's going to be in a better place and that she's going to continue to thrive. But these are stories for which endings cannot be written. And so I think that's uncomfortable to realize, oh, this is a story that doesn't end, which means that trauma doesn't end. And who wants to face that?
What about you? I mean, you write a lot about it. So have you faced it? Do you constantly face it?
I think I've faced it at this point. I mean, I think it's an ongoing project, but writing has certainly helped me to make peace with the past. Well, I don't even know if peace is the word, but to just make sense of it and to forgive myself, even though I shouldn't need to. But I think that there was a sense that I needed to sort of understand, you were a kid. You can not carry this. It wasn't your fault. But I think I'm still dealing with the aftermath to a lesser extent. I mean, you know, at just some point you get so over it, you're like, oh, fine, whatever. I'm just done. And I've also been in therapy for 20 years. So, like, look, I know myself well enough. There's literally nothing more to explore here. It's all taken care of. So, you know, I'm an ongoing project, but I think with each passing year and the more mature I get, the happier I become, and the more I feel like, yes, I'm as good as I'm gonna get, which is not perfect, and I also accept that in myself. Like, there are some things you just never fully recover from, and I allow myself that too, which is extremely freeing.
Well, you published these two books the same year, The Year of You, as Time magazine said it was, but you didn't want your parents to read them. I mean, apparently your father has, but why didn't you want them to read your books?
Well, I didn't want them to read Bad Feminist because I was like, oh, these are private thoughts that I'm putting in a bestseller. Good times. My mom respected my rule and didn't read, but my dad read both books. My mom also read my novel. And they found out about the books from Time magazine, which I don't recommend. But
it won't happen to most of us, you know?
Yeah. No, it was so strange. I just never thought the books were going to do well, and so I was like, I'm sure I can just pretend. They know I write, but they didn't know I wrote like on this level. And now they're my biggest fans. And whenever my dad goes to a bookstore, he moves my books around the store. He is fantastic. And my mom is just a phone tree. She will tell anyone at any time about my books, and so beware. If you see a very tiny Haitian woman saying Roxane Gay, just run in the opposite direction.
So your father wants more action for An Untamed State.
He did.
But what did he think of Bad Feminist?
He told me I had too many opinions. Yeah.
Speaking of this, because, I mean, you write about absolutely everything, from pop culture to politics. And then there's this race and feminist theme going through it all. But I was wondering, because we want to know your opinion on some subjects, if you're okay with that. What about the Eurovision Song Contest? Have you seen it?
Hell yeah. I watch Eurovision every year.
You do?
Yeah, I legally stream it. But this year, it's the first year you can watch it in the US. But last night, I was in my hotel room. Then someone on Twitter said, oh, the semifinals are on. I just thought it was Saturday. And so I turned and I watched the entire thing. It was perfect. It was just so good.
So who are you rooting for so far?
I'm Freddie from Hungary. Because he was his cheekbones were so sharp. And he would just look so happy with himself. He just kept looking at the camera like, and I was like, oh, Freddie, what is happening? And the Russia guy was very engaged with his graphics.
He was?
Yes. But I thought the show was it was so beautifully produced. My God. I was really impressed. The production values were A+.
We should have you as a commentator.
Oh, I would be so good at it. I would be so good at it. Did you see Austria sang a French song?
Yes.
Like, what is going on there? And then Greece. It was just so much happening last night.
So for next year, SVT, you should do this.
I would.
Well, actually, when I've been researching you, I mean, I see you on Twitter and on stage, and they ask you not about what you write only, but about everything. I mean, from the most weird fashion tips to cultural appropriation of the big butt. It's like you're a guru.
It's bizarre because I'm just me, and so I'm always just thinking I'm the last person you should ask for life advice. But it's a lot of fun sometimes, and then other times I just tell people I'm not an opinion vending machine. Like, I'm just not here to answer every single question that you have. But it's very flattering that people care about my opinion, and so I try not to take it for granted. And I try to be gracious about it more often than not, though sometimes I'm just like, ah. And so it can be difficult because people don't recognize, like, there's a difference between Roxane Gay, the writer, and public persona, and that I'm also just sometimes well, always just Roxane, the human being.
But I mean, you write in Bad Feminist, in the introduction, you write that people who are placed on pedestals are expected to pose perfectly. Then they get knocked off when they fuck it up. I regularly fuck it up, so consider me already knocked off.
Yes.
But actually, despite that wish, I would say we look to you for answers. So does that scare you?
It does. It absolutely does. You know, the very thing I asked people not to do, they do anyway. It's difficult. It's very difficult. And it is very scary because you can see the ways in which public sentiment can turn against someone very quickly when they step out of line or when they disappoint. And so I always just try to be upfront and say, yeah, I'm going to disappoint you a lot. And so let's get that out of the way before we really get into anything else.
Well, you have a new book coming this summer.
I do.
Hunger.
Yes.
So what's that about?
Yes. Hunger is a memoir, which I never thought I would write, but it's a body memoir. It's about trauma and obesity and what it's like to just live in the world in a larger-than-life body and the challenges of weight loss in a culture that's obsessed with weight loss. And sort of how do I come to terms with my own body and making it smaller. And so it's actually, I'm finishing it up this weekend. It's late. Yeah. It's very, very, very late. It was supposed to come out in June, but now it's going to come out in the fall.
So promoting that book, does that feel safer or worse?
That feels way worse. Because, I mean, the body is what it is. People see you, they make their decisions and opinions about you. But now I'm actually talking about it and acknowledging sort of what goes unacknowledged. And so I'm nervous, but it also feels like this was the right book to write at this time. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, please come back when it's published.
I will,
as well.
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Roxane Gay.